Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. I hope you are well. Just came across a story that I think all of you will be extremely interested in. It's about, fortunately, this push towards Marxism with our central planners here in the United States and a push towards central bank digital currencies. Let's dive right into the article and you'll see what I'm talking about. This is from Zero Hedge. It's Biden's nominee for top bank regulator, earned Lenin Award, praised USSR's equality, and wants to end banking as we know it. Now, I don't know that the author, Mr. Durden, not his real name, was able to connect the dots here when he described this gal's view towards banking, because it's not really ending banking. I guess it is ending banking as we know it, but it's really a push towards a central bank digital currency, something we have been talking about on this channel for a long, long time. So let's get into it here. Cornell University law professor Sule Amarova, who proposed ending banking as we know it, and that radical change to the system would make institutions more inclusive, efficient, and stable. You know, whenever you hear the word inclusive, it's just they're going to be parroting some sort of drivel from the World Economic Forum or from Marx himself. Until I came to the US, I couldn't imagine that things like the gender pay gap still existed in the world today. Say what you will about old USSR, there was no gender pay gap there. Market doesn't always, quote unquote, know best. I think what shocks me the most about a statement like this is that anyone above the age of 10 could have this view. Because if you do just a little teeny weeny bit of research, you see that the gender pay gap is completely bogus. It's when you compare apples to apples, the pay gap almost completely disappears. And in some jobs, I believe it was pharmacist and a few others, the pay gap is actually the inverse, where women get paid more than men, assuming that it's an apples to apples comparison, that they have the same education, they had the same major. And Thomas Sowell has done an extensive amount of research on this. And it's weird because they debunked this way back in the 80s and the 90s. And for some reason, it's just one of those things that the mainstream media just says over and over and over again, and people don't take the time to research it. So they just repeat it as though, well, it's got to be true, because I just hear it so often that if it was wrong, then I wouldn't hear it all the time. And it's just amazing that a gal that could be that Biden could suggest for or nominate for this role could be so clueless and could be so uneducated when it comes to the reality of the situation, and just openly go out on social media and espouse, I don't want to go so far as to say lies, but I think one could come to that conclusion, but espouse things that are just I guess ignorant would be the best way to say it. So she tweeted this in 2019, and after receiving harsh criticism, she says, "I never claimed women and men were treated absolutely equally in every facet of Soviet life, but people's salaries were set by the state in a gender-blind manner, and all women got very generous maternity benefits. Both things are still a pipe dream in our society." Ah. Oh, geez. Do you think that there's any woman in the United States right now that would prefer to live in communist Russia during the 1960s and the 1970s than in the United States today? Or let's go back to 2019. That's probably a better comparison. I mean, give me a break. This is just pure brain dead drivel, is all this is. So, of course, she supports the Green New Deal, it's saying, and the creation of a giant bureaucracy she dubbed the National Investment Authority, which would, among other things, coordinate the long term economic strategy for the United States with upcoming infrastructure developments, according to the Washington Free Beacon. It would also manage a big, bold climate agenda. Whenever politicians use the word bold, you know that you should just run the other direction, or you know that it's going to collapse the economy if they have their way. The authority would have a congressionally approved governing board and regional offices across the country. That's what we need is more bureaucracy. We need more red tape, bigger government, more central planning, and more bureaucracy, because that would solve all of our problems. I mean, just look at history. Isn't that the story? Is that whenever governments get huge and massive and take away freedom and take away private property rights and do more and more economic planning, that they always flourish. I mean, it's just, again, it's just so ignorant that it's just childish. And it's amazing that someone that could be nominated for this type of a role could just have these ideas and espouse them publicly. It's unbelievable. But anyway, she wants to coordinate the long-term economic strategy for the United States. Okay, we talked about that. And that, let's see. So, of course, developing roads, bridges, infrastructure projects. The authority would fund affordable housing, public transport, clean energy projects, climate change mitigation solutions. And remember, whenever you hear the word solutions, that's another red flag. It's just like when the central planners omit natural immunity from the conversation about mandates. You know that they're lying to you, or you know that they're trying to manipulate you, or they're spinning the truth, and they're really using more propaganda than anything else. And the reason I say that is because it goes back again to what Thomas Sowell teaches us, that there are no solutions in economics. There are only trade-offs. So whenever you hear someone like Miss Amarova talk about solutions, you know that A, she doesn't know what she's talking about, or B, that she's trying to use propaganda to manipulate you. And here's another just wonderful idea. She thinks that asset prices, pay scales, capital, and credit should be dictated by the federal government. Because again, that's worked well throughout history. In a recent paper, The People's Ledger, she proposed that the Federal Reserve take over consumer bank deposits, effectively ending banking as we know it. Oh, but wait, you as rebel capitalists know what would happen if the Federal Reserve takes over consumer bank deposits. That means we would all have a bank account with the Fed, which essentially means they would need to ban cash, and we would have a Fed coin, a central bank digital currency. And then she goes on to say just that. She'd also like to see the U.S. create a central bank digital currency. There we go. Just like Venezuela and China. Yeah, because those are two countries that we really want to emulate. Oh, what else does she say? Can I even take it? No, I can't take any more of this. Here's what I want to emphasize. The way you achieve more wealth in a society, meaning producing more and more goods and services efficiently, is not through central planning. That should be obvious to anyone that just surveys the world around them or just takes 5 minutes to study history to determine in the past what has worked well and what has not worked well. But it's not just about capitalism. It's about free market capitalism. That's key. And that's why I always use the term free market capitalism and never only the term capitalism. Because with capitalism, you've got private property rights. And yes, that is good. And that is part of the equation. That's mandatory if you're wanting a society that produces those goods and services efficiently. If you want a healthy, growing economy, if you want to increase the standard of living, you've got to have private property rights. But it doesn't end there. You've got to have a free market. And that's what we do not have in the United States, because in a free market, you allow businesses to fail. You allow banks to fail. You allow these things to go bust, even if it means the stock market goes down, even if it means the housing market goes down. Because when the economy is rebuilt, then those people who were prudent with their capital take over the assets from the entities and individuals that were imprudent. And that benefits society moving forward, because capital is going where it is treated best. And you create an environment that produces more of the stuff that you buy on a daily basis. The more stuff, what happens to the price? It goes down, as long as there's not this intervention from the central banks and all of this money printing. And then we get into a society that isn't over levered, doesn't have much debt, but yet prices are going down. So that creates more demand for those products, and it gives your dollars even more purchasing power, which does the opposite of what we've been talking about in most of our videos lately. That instead of having to go out the risk curve, now all of a sudden you can take less and less risk with your savings and still increase your purchasing power. That's when the magic happens. A lot of you in the comments, I've noticed, have been talking about these pencils that I have right here, these number 2 pencils. And you're saying, man, George, that's weird. You don't have any pens. Who on earth uses a pencil anymore? Well, for those of you who don't know, there's a reason why I have these pencils. Because one of my favorite economists of all times, one of my intellectual heroes, if you will, Milton Friedman, had a very famous story about a pencil and how it represents just how important a free market is to society and the standard of living improving. And this story also points out how you could never, ever, ever improve the standard of living through a centrally planned economy. So I want to go over that very short clip here to remind you guys, and then to introduce it to those of you who haven't seen it, and then maybe more importantly, introduce it to Miss Amarova, because she and Biden really need to sit down and pay attention to this video from the 1970s from Milton Friedman.
There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was a magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
Bam. Mic drop right there from Milton Friedman. And so many fantastic points about free market capitalism and why central planning will never, ever work. No matter how much Biden and Miss Amarova, or whatever her name, no matter how much they love Marxism and taking power and control over the economy, they can't make a pencil at the end of the day. That's the real message here. And that if we want to strive forward as a society, if we want to improve the lot of the poor and the middle class, we don't need more central planning. We need more free market capitalism. I'll let you guys take that message with you and kind of dwell on it over the evening. And if you didn't, if the audio was kind of bad there with Milton Friedman, just go ahead and look that up on YouTube. It's well worth your time to watch that video at least 2 or 3 times, because it really resonates with what we are seeing in the world today and why it's so destructive. If these central planners get their way, and if they are able to push us into an economy that is more planned and more centralized, how that's going to take us to an economic place that is far worse than 2019 and even far worse than today. We will all become poorer as a result. So that's why we need to have that sense of urgency and understand that our freedom and liberty is at stake here, but also our standard of living. Let's go ahead and do some shout outs. We've got Gilda Atari, Malaysia Numismatic in the house, Algo Gator, Deciduous, Discipline. Huh. Okay. Who else do we got in the house? A history person, David Lamar. Sharon Romano, Rooster Cogburn, hashtag End the Fed, Hugh Mann, Blob Monster, the Godfather, Doug Click, Mike Dennis, MMMM, Steve Z, Mice Elf, Justin Cabral. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll see you in the next video.